Hello, this is going to be my in-depth review of the entire Wheel of Time series. I am going to go through each and every book here, so if you don't want to sit through the whole thing, I will put time annotations down below for you to skip to individual books, or to my conclusion where I kind of summarize, wrap up my opinions of the whole series. Now to get some numbers out of the way, the Wheel of Time series is pretty hard to get into. It is almost 4.5 million words long. It is over 11,000 pages total. And if you want to listen to it on audio, it's going to take you over 461 hours. So it is a bit of a Goliath series. That being said, let's jump into book one, The Eye of the World. The Eye of the World starts with us being introduced to a village and three specific farm boys who clearly are going to be pretty much our main characters for the series. The book establishes that very well off right away. And we do meet more characters, their friends, their confidants within the village, and we also meet some newcomers to the village and a couple strangers. From here, the series takes us on our adventure. Bad things start happening to the village, and of course, the three protagonists must leave, as the beginning trope for almost every fantasy series ever. Now, what the Wheel of Time does differently here is that all of these characters that are leaving the village don't really want to go. There's none of the happy, oh, we have to go on this adventure, yay. Everyone's leaving and they don't really want to, but you understand their motivations for leaving. From here, the book starts building its world. And it does probably the best job I've ever seen of world building within a fantasy series. From the get-go, we start getting the histories, the lore, the legends, and the prophecies of the world through our main wizard guide type character named Moraine. She does a very good job of informing the young farm boys, Perrin, Matt, and Rand, of the world they are going into. Because these boys are so uneducated, they really don't know what they are getting into, and eventually they start having to make decisions, and they all start learning about themselves. And I really like the way that The Eye of the World does this because it splits them up a lot. Not everyone's alone, but they all have to go on their own separate adventures with maybe one or two other people and start learning about what their own limits are. And I really feel like that's the main focus of The Eye of the World. What happens when you put great pressure on people who are inexperienced and you really start seeing their real character? And this is the theme throughout the story. I'm not going to go any more depth of The Eye of the World. I don't want to spoil the entire thing. By the end, things have escalated to a great degree, and now we are dealing with a higher level, a higher scale. The stakes are higher by the end of the book, and we learn what really is going on and the big twist of who the Dragon Reborn is. I'm not going to spoil that within the first book. I am going to have to talk about it in later books. If you have not started the series and you don't want it to be spoiled, don't listen on from here on out. Go away. Now we're going to get into the overall review of book one. I think book one is one of the best books in the series because of how well it introduces you to the world. It's not the most exciting book, it's not the most important book, but it does a great job of making you care about these characters. So I'm going to give book one an 8 out of 10. From here, we move on to book two, The Great Hunt. The Great Hunt is one of the best books in this series, again, in my opinion. I really love the beginning three. The Great Hunt starts off with Rand, after he realizes he's the Dragon Reborn, wanting to get away from everything. He wants to just run away, he wants to be alone, he doesn't want to hurt anyone around him. But in reality, he doesn't. He doesn't want to be alone. He wants to be with his friends, he wants to have that comfort, and he really struggles with the idea of the fact he might accidentally kill people near him because he doesn't want to be going insane with his channeling, using magic. The more you learn about the men who go insane from using magic and the fact that women don't, and this book really develops the power dynamic between the two more and shows why men are being hunted so much that can channel. We also get more about the other false dragons within this book, especially the Borderlanders' hatred for them. And the thing that makes book two so cool to me is that the characters are not at a super power level yet. They aren't, moving nations. They're still kind of this farm boy feel, but they also all know they'll never go back to that life. At least they don't know it in their heads, but they kind of know it in their hearts. And what we end up with is a very cool cat and mouse theme throughout the first half of the book, where the main characters we've learned to follow and care about are chasing down and hunting the person who stole this very powerful artifact, the Horn of Valier. And it's very interesting to see this fantasy series turn into this kind of chase-themed book, and then in the second half almost turn into a heist kind of book where they're trying to steal it. And that's probably my favorite part of the book, is when they're actually trying to steal back the artifact from this noble's manor. It has a very interesting, unique setting for a fantasy book, and I kind of fell in love with the series in this book because it was so different than anything else I'd read in the genre. And there is this other character introduced to Rand, who's this mysterious woman who keeps tempting him to go investigate his powers more without really telling him to do that. And it's hinted at pretty heavily that she's some kind of dark, important figure, but we don't learn more about that till later. Now, there is the big famous battle at the end of book 2 where Rand fights the Dark One, essentially the devil of this world. And this results with him receiving his very famous, important scar that will cripple him for the rest of his life. Of course, at the very end of the series, we find out that this was not the Dark One. It was likely just one of the Forsaken, one of the high-up servants of the Dark One who wanted to challenge Rand, who had probably gone insane believing he himself was the Dark One. Now, this turns out to be the person who has been tormenting Rand for so long, and we know neither of them are dead, but we know that Rand did hurt him. It showed that the main adversary is hurtable, killable, maybe even. And this kind of opens up a new tone where instead of running and hiding, now there's this feel of maybe we can fight back. I'm going to give book 2 an 8.5 out of 10. Now we're going to get into book 3, The Dragon Reborn. And as the title suggests, this is where the series starts actually kind of going into the main arc, the story of the actual rise of the Dragon Reborn. I'm no longer going to get into specific plot details regarding the books. I'm just going to explore the overall ideas and themes of them. And for this book, I feel like the main idea being explored is trust between friends. A lot of people are arguing, a lot of people are not getting along, and Rand is just gone, and they're just hearing about these horrible things that he's done, or maybe these really great things, they're just not sure, and by the end of it, he suddenly has this essentially nuclear-level power in his hands. It's about, can you trust him? Can you trust your friends when the world is completely changed around you, when the stakes are so much higher? Can you still rely on that childhood friendship, that bond? And I think by the end of the books, it's been answered as yes, with kind of a asterisk attached. It's not perfect, but these people still do love each other, no matter what. Overall, I'm going to give book 3 a 7 out of 10. It is a very good book, and definitely not a low point by any means, but it's not as good as the first two, in my opinion. Now we are going to get into book 4, The Shadow Rising. Book 4 is mainly about cultural differences in a weird way. We start seeing sea folk and Aiel at a greater scale, and it's about the differences that are actually within this world. And I really like what happens here. The culture shock, the level of bigotry and cultural resistance that goes on. The Wheel of Time world is just so big and grand, and these tensions feel so real, especially coming in with the Shadow Rising. Now, we learned that the dark woman that was tempting Rand before is actually one of the Forsaken named Lanfear. She was in love with the last Dragon Reborn, and she thinks she's in love with Rand, and they also have this big conflict, and Rand goes into the Aiel Waste. And of course, the end of the book is another big conflict with this Forsaken. We also meet a few more important characters in this book, like Aviendha and some of the Aiel chiefs. Overall, it's just a very interesting experience to go from this nobility that had been so well established in the first 3 books to this completely different culture in this other book, and it really allows new avenues of storytelling. Overall, I'm going to give book 4, The Shadow Rising, a 8 out of 10 again. Really like this book. Now we're going to get into book 5, The Fires of Heaven. This book really explores the idea that no one is just going to go under Rand without a fight. Even though he is the Dragon Reborn and people know the world's going to end if he fails, everyone still has their own agendas, their own ideas, their own greed, and this makes it so that Rand has to fight for everything. He kind of starts realizing this throughout the book. No one's just going to kneel, no matter how hard he tries to just bend and break them. And Rand starts to really struggle with himself in this book. And on the other side note, Mat becomes my favorite character in this book. He had already kind of been shooting up through the ranks, but oh my god, I love what he does in this book, and who he becomes, and how important he becomes. Perrin's been off doing his own thing for a while at this point, and I do really like his side story as well. I'm not going to get into that for time's sake, but definitely worth mentioning. Overall, I'm going to give Fires of Heaven a 7.5 out of 10. It is really great, but I don't think it's as good as the first two. Now we're going to get into my favorite book of the series, Book 6, Lord of Chaos. Lord of Chaos features probably one of the best battle sequences in any fantasy series ever. I love Dumai's Wells. I love the build up to it, the tension. We're not going to get into that though. The main idea covered in Book 6, in my opinion, is that of betrayal. Whether it's the more exploring of the shattering of the White Tower, the obvious betrayal of Rand and the White Tower, the tension between Rand and Mazrim Taim as he kind of trains the Black Tower, and the more subtle betrayal between Perrin, his wife, and Berelain. There's just so many people trying to struggle to maintain friendships, maintain these connections. All of our characters have reached great levels of power and fame within their world, but they're still trying to maintain that kind of friendship they had where they could just trust each other indefinitely. And it's really rotting away, and that's very prevalent in this book. Everyone is having conflict with each other. Overall, I'm going to give Lord of Chaos a 10 out of 10. There was not one chapter in this book that did not have me just on the edge of my seat. Now we're going to get into Book 7, Crown of Swords. We're halfway there. We can get through this. Crown of Swords has a less focused ideology. I tried to think of something that maybe this book is covering, but we see characters struggling with a lot of different things here. Rand's biggest struggle here, in my opinion, is trying to find happiness. Whether it's with men, whether it's just trying to maintain peace, or finally conquer one of his enemies, he's just trying to get some semblance of happiness. It almost feels like to me he's trying to feel human, because he's reached a level at this point where he's really not. I mean, he can do more things than almost anyone else in the world with the power at this point, and he is scary. He's uncovering and discovering these things left and right that the world had forgotten. Meanwhile, all of our other characters are struggling with different things, whether it's in Abu Dar or, essentially Matt gets raped very frequently in this book, and it's kind of just glossed over, but it is rape, and he goes through a really big struggle. We also see the White Tower still kind of battling it out. I did like this book a lot, but it's not up there with the greats. I'm going to give Crown of Swords overall just a 7 out of 10. Now we're going to get into Book 8, Path of Daggers. Path of Daggers is an interesting book. We see Rand really start flexing his muscles here and going to open war, really leading the fight. We see other people besides Rand start fighting back against the Shadow, fixing the weather, trying to take in control of the madman known as the Prophet. We really see Rand fail here miserably a couple times while his friends succeed, which is an interesting shift to happen. Not that his friends have been failing before, but to see him really suffer while they're kind of thriving. I guess Perrin's not exactly thriving, but he is still succeeding in a large way. He gets his way. I think it's definitely an interesting book, and I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10. Rand's struggle is interesting in this one, and I think that's the best part of this book. Now we're going to get into Book 9, Winter's Heart. This is where the series takes a bit of a downhill turn for me. I find Perrin's struggle after a while to be just kind of monotonous to find his wife. Rand's reunion with the girls to be a little too smooth, and just everything here just seems less interesting to me. It's not a bad book by any means. I'm going to give it a 6.5 out of 10. Now we're going to get into Crossroads of Twilight. I don't think this book deserves as much hatred as it gets. It is still an interesting book. It is just very dialogue heavy. It is a lot about kind of fleshing out character relationships and dynamics. I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. Now we're going to get into Book 11, Knife of Dreams. The series does pick up a bit here in pace, and I do like Knife of Dreams significantly more than the last two books. The Siege of the White Tower is fairly interesting. Rand's losing control is definitely interesting and shows a very interesting power dynamic going on with his insanity and the man in his head. That being said, it's still not nearly as good as the first few books, and I'm only going to give it a 7 out of 10. 3 more books to go. Book 12, written by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson. I really want to give a shout out to Brandon Sanderson. I think he really knew how to finish the series, and I think he took it home very well. I love Robert Jordan to death, but I feel like Brandon Sanderson was the one to finish this series. You can tell he was a fan by how he wrote. Okay, Book 12. I really like this book. All the building tension for the entire series really starts coming to a head here, and we start seeing these Goliath characters that have just spent so long gathering their power finally start colliding and going against each other, and we see the world not united at all, and it takes some drastic action by characters to try to get it united. We see Rand become the Zen Rand, as he's referred to, and almost threaten to just bring down the White Tower if they don't get in line. Easy to get behind him on this, but it's also easy to get behind the White Tower, and the struggles between the characters that were once such close friends really become visceral, and the emotion there is real. And I'm going to give Gathering Storm a solid 8.5 out of 10. Book 13, Crossroads of Twilight. It is hard for me to tell you how I feel about this book because I hate how this book makes me feel at sometimes. I really agree and disagree with characters I love. Hard to disagree with someone that you've grown up with so much, but it makes the conflict between the characters so much more visceral, and I really enjoy the level of tension there is between these people we've been following for so long. The shattering of the seals is one of my favorite conflicts within the entire series because you understand every side of it, and with how poor a job Rand does communicating his side, it's understandable to be against him, even though Egwene, the head of the against him side, is so unlikable at this point. I'm going to give this book an 8.7 out of 10. I know that's a picky number, but I just can't give it a 9 for some reason. Book 14, the last book in the Wheel of Time series. The absolute climax of this many-year journey that, if you finish the series, we've all been on. I love this book. I think the last battle was handled beautifully. I think Matt is really shining really through in this book. Of course, there are some downsides to it. The way they handle Padon Fane at the end is a little disappointing. The way the book actually ends, I do not like it at all. I hate the last scene in the book. I really do. But I think Perrin's fight is enthralling. I think Rand's ideological, philosophical debate with the Dark One is incredibly interesting, and it was such a great way to end that. And the actual fighting and battling itself, well, I just need to say Lan, you all know what I'm talking about, and you all know how much emotion there was in that. I personally think he should have died. It would have made it more emotional for me, but I understand why he didn't. I just really don't like the last scene. That being said, I love the book as a whole, and I am going to confidently give it a 9 out of 10. My thoughts on the Wheel of Time series as a whole. I have been reading this series since I was about 13. I am now 21. It has been a massive part of my life, and I think I've been through the whole series 4 times. I really, really love them. I will defend Wheel of Time against Lord of the Rings, well against Game of Thrones. I think that Wheel of Time crafted the best flushed out fantasy world that has ever been written because of the histories, the characters, the relationship between the nations, the different cultures. It just feels the most real of any series I've ever read because it's just so realistic and so many of the human ways people behave. Overall, I'm going to give the series a 9 out of 10. I know it doesn't average out that way, but I have a lot of emotion tied to it, and I'm probably going to read it again soon. I'm happy to do it. I hope you enjoyed my review. If you made it to the end, congratulations, and have a great day. Peace.